how do we support both teachers and students and the students' families with all of this? Because for so many people, it's so new. And we've been talking about these conversations a lot. We've talked about these tools for a very long time, but when you're sort of more on the early adopter side of things, it's hard to remember that not everyone has that same experience and not everyone is at that same place. And things that feel old or feel like, oh, everyone can do that, aren't things that everyone actually can do. And especially when we're talking about families from limited means or families that are new to America or don't have, English proficiency, we're looking at a whole host of other challenges on top of the challenges that we're already identifying. So there's just a lot, I think, wrapped up in that. But at its core, I think the whole idea of digital teaching and learning comes down to what are the core instructional tenets that we want people to be using. And I would say even further down than that, it comes down to relationships. Like, how can we support students and families and teachers on a relational, personal level? Because if they're not, like if we're thinking about Maslow, if they're not feeling that, there's no way that they can learn. Like, you can't learn calculus when you're feeling unsafe.
One of the things that you touched on, Kendra, that I really, really agree with and appreciated was that we've had to answer and at least address the issues of access in our communities, and the use of technology for digital teaching and learning has become an equity issue of the day, right? And so part of one of the silver linings of this pandemic is that we have not been able to just push that off, that we can't, or we, don't have the funding, or we don't have, whatever the reasoning is. We've had to really look head on and address those issues of access, which are a first step in the problem of addressing the achievement gap. You mentioned we've got lots of marginalized students who have not historically had access. And so we've not been able to use some of the methods of digital teaching and learning perhaps that we wanted, because we couldn't guarantee that all students would have that same equitable access. And I think that's a wonderful thing, a byproduct that's come out of the work through COVID. But as we've all three sort of touched on, I still, at the end of the day, I think it comes down to that intentional use of technology. And so now that we can't teach without it in our current reality, now we're starting to have really good conversations about, why do I need to use this technology, right? We're having to move beyond the, shiny, right? Let me just go find a tool and just use it to death, right? But we're really starting to look more than ever at the pedagogical uses, and how does this particular tool, this digital tool, really help promote understanding or mastery of standards as we work with kids. And so our why is becoming more important. I used to hear just people say, why digital teaching and learning? Well, it's engagement, right? As if engagement's a high bar. My kids are really engaged watching TV, but that's not really what our, engagement's pretty low bar, right? We want mastery of standards, and we want to be able to close that achievement gap. And so I think we're finally just starting to have some really great conversations, intentional planning about why we choose the tools we do, how these tools can help us, talking about Maslow, right? Beginning with that strong foundation of relationship, but then building on so that we can help kids at all levels grow and become their best selves through that, and then close that achievement gap. So I think, it's great that we're addressing some equity issues, but also we're getting better at choosing tools and using tools and being intentional about how we're using them in our instruction. So
we had a similar situation going on with access for internet. Thankfully, we were already in a situation where we had one-to-one devices for all of our students. They weren't deployed in a take-home model, so COVID kind of rushed that a little quicker than I think a lot of schools were interested in. But we were so thankful that we had those devices ready to go for our students. The internet issue was certainly an issue for us. We had a fair number of hotspots that went out as well. In Charleston County, we have a kind of odd situation where 20 miles from where I'm sitting right now, there's really no internet. So if I go to schools out there, my cell phone stops working and there's no option for connectivity. So in our department, IT did a really great job of manning buses that went out to communities like that. And the bus would go out and sit for whatever period of time to ensure that the communities had internet that needed them. So whether the kids had hotspots or not, they were trying to do everything they could to ensure that students were able to connect to the internet. And we still haven't been able to connect all of the kids at home, but we're hopeful that there'll be more permanent infrastructure changes to allow for high-speed internet at all of our students' homes. Another thing that IT did in our district was have buses that went around on certain loops on certain days to repair and exchange devices for kids, because we ran into some issues where kids' devices were breaking or there were problems with them, and the families weren't able to fix those. And so IT was fantastic in riding a bus, going around to different schools and allowing community members and families to come and get their devices fixed and ensure that they were getting on Wi-Fi.
Yes, we were focused as far as facilitating remote learning and digital teaching and learning experiences on understanding the importance of the moment. The kind of our mantra, I guess, as a leadership team was figuring out how to strike while the iron was hot. We had 1 week, our teachers had just 1 week between the onset of remote learning and the closure of schools. So the experience that they had, in terms of being able to facilitate remote learning experiences, having professional development opportunities, developing content, all of that. And for, some people, new platforms was a big challenge. And they, obviously did what teachers always do, and they just blew it out of the water. But some of the ways that we, worked on reaching our students and our families was first focusing on the premise that strong and sustained relationships are and always will be the key to impact. Our school district, Deanna Finger, our assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction, Shelley Black, our elementary director, lots of folks collaborated to create a fantastic instructional plan for common expectations for remote learning. And in that process, we kind of took it and tweaked it and made it our own for how we reached our families. So we had synchronous sessions that we offered to our families, online instruction, but obviously not everybody had access. So, we provided paper packets for students, but for students who had those paper packets, but couldn't necessarily access, they didn't have internet, in their home, Wi-Fi, maybe they didn't have a device readily accessible, they can utilize a mobile device and actually phone in to a Google Meet. So we had parents and students calling into class, synchronous class sessions, so that no one didn't have access. If they could pick up the phone and call mom or dad or grandma, they could pick up the phone and call into our Google Meets or our Zoom sessions. And so that was just realizing that and taking advantage and capitalizing on that knowledge was particularly transformational for our students who maybe had access to the assignments in front of them for new instruction, but didn't necessarily have access to the teacher directly. We utilized digital tools to screencast lessons for review of learning and also for initial content delivery. In terms of meeting the needs of our families during remote learning, we've also focused on an attention to platform agnosticism. So what I mean by that is ensuring that no matter what device our parents or our students are utilizing to be able to collaborate to access our teachers and their content, that we made it to where any device could access that content readily. So those are some of the ways that we've done some things to access or provide equity and access. We also utilized, for packet pickup for a while there, we weren't really sure what the research was saying as far as how contact spread of COVID-19 would be an issue for, turning in paper packets for people who didn't have access. So we focused on students having the autonomy to send photos in of completed work within their packets using cell phones. So Class Dojo, they collected work, Google Classroom, if they could turn it in digitally, but we had extremely high, greater than 90% of our students remained consistently engaged throughout COVID-19. And some of the data that we're getting back now from our students' performance on assessments this year, so passports for learning, things like that, are showing, even after the summer, after the remote learning period in the spring, and little to no instruction since they had returned, we're seeing, upwards of 70% proficiency on prior grade level standards. And for a school, a very high, almost 70% free and reduced lunch percentage, that's a huge accomplishment for our teachers to have pulled off. So I'm a firm believer that, being innovative and creative and thinking through problem solving, using digital teaching and learning tools, there are ways to access and extend equity in that access to our families that just require hard work. And our teachers, I can say definitely the work that they did is proof of that.
One of the things that you talked about, Jamie, that I really loved is being able to reach them, right? And continue to build on those relationships. And one of the things that we discovered, and my guess would be that you guys have had to do something similar. 8 months ago, we had no need for a family or student support help desk. But we're discovering, right? Not only is this a new modality for kids, but we've got a lot of parents who are not familiar with the technology either. And they're trying to learn how to use Google Classroom and Canvas and all these other tools. And how do I even log into the portal and where are those instructions? And so we discovered really quickly that we were going to need, regardless of whether or not we had the staff for it or the tools for it, there was a need for family support. And so we figured out, we repurposed some staff and did some shuffling to be able to get a number that families could call, an email address that they could put in a ticket of their own, and to be able to separate off those kinds of calls. And then we also put together tech guides for families, making sure that those were translated and translatable into other languages and easily searchable. And so standing up something where parents felt like they could help their students helped to build a partnership for us with those families, because it was not just the teachers and the principals and the students who were learning new things. Parents were overwhelmed and doing the best they could. And so we realized very quickly that in order to make the best use of our time with students, we had to give parents the support so that they felt like they were able to help their kids. I'd be curious to know how you guys maybe addressed that in your work.
Yeah, we had the same situation. So we found having really clear guides and clear support resources for families really helped a lot. And especially having it available for us, Spanish especially has been really, really helpful. I think the schools have done an amazing job at sort of supporting and serving families with their issues, but we developed a Google form where they could report issues. And if it was something that the school couldn't handle, then someone from the central office would take care of that for them. But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It was not something like we always had a family support website going, but the sort of acute needs that they turned up with were, I didn't anticipate needing sort of a family helpline and that sort of more on-demand help.
Digital teaching and learning, I've really seen as the purposeful integration of teaching and learning, right? Those quality instructional practices and backwards design and all those things that we know to be crucial and paramount to high quality learning experiences for students, but then using the technology to be able to amplify that for learners who have a diverse array of backgrounds, ability levels. There's a fantastic chart that Jill Thompson has shared in previous professional development that is focused on personalized instruction versus differentiated instruction versus individualized instruction. But so much of that and the ability to facilitate that is contingent upon the purposeful integration and utilization of technology tools. I think that one human being sitting in a chair or in front of a classroom, whether it's online or face-to-face, being able to facilitate high-quality learning experiences for lots of kids, is very difficult to do without the added benefit of diagnostic technologies, adaptive tools, things that allow us to facilitate high-quality personalized learning experiences. Really, I see, again, to Allison's point, that there is such a symbiotic relationship between technology and good teaching. And I really believe firmly that we have to maintain a use of technology constantly in our teaching. I think COVID-19 has made that very apparent without choice in a lot of circumstances. But I think it's also changed us in such a way that I'm not sure we're ever going to be able to go back from this. And I can't say that that's a bad thing. I think the diverse of learning experiences that we're going to be able to offer to a diverse array of learners is, something that we can't turn back from. And to think about, as far as digital teaching and learning integration goes, the districts that may have had limited access during this time, but still were forced to go remote, the ways that those districts and schools have adapted so quickly to being, able not only to facilitate online or remote learning experiences, teaching in two different modalities at the same time, but also providing access, foster equity for those groups of students is absolutely incredible. I've seen it happen in my own building, my own district this year, and just couldn't be more impressed at the resilience, not only of our teachers, but our students and our families as well, who are helping to facilitate digital teaching and learning right now. So, technology enables connectedness with no bounds. And I think to imagine learning in the absence of technology is, that's what I lived, right? But I think it's it's not a world I can unimagine at this point. So, being able to foster learner pathways, profiles for every child, to truly individualize instruction, that's what digital teaching and learning to me is truly about.